Everyone is talking about oil prices. Oil above $100. Brent crude at $126 at its peak. Analysts running scenarios at $150, $170, $200. That's the number dominating every financial news headline right now. But there's a second number that nobody's talking about, and this one hits closer to home than the price at the petrol pump. It shows up in the bread aisle, the meat section, the dairy fridge, the produce section. It's the price of fertilizer. And what is happening to it right now is the beginning of a food price shock that most people won't feel for another 6 to 12 months, by which point it will be too late to see it coming. Let me explain. The same Strait of Hormuz that carries 20% of the world's oil also carries roughly 1/3 of all globally traded fertilizer. Specifically, nitrogen-based fertilizer, the kind made from natural gas, which the Gulf countries produce in enormous quantities, is the most critical input in modern agriculture. And here's the thing about nitrogen fertilizer that most people don't know. You cannot skip it. You can delay buying a new car. You can put off upgrading your phone. You can even skip a year of applying certain other nutrients to farmland and not completely destroy a harvest. But nitrogen is different. Nitrogen is the one input that crops need every single year, in every single growing season, with almost no flexibility. Without it, yields fall, not gradually, but sharply and immediately. And right now, the world's largest suppliers of nitrogen fertilizer are stuck behind a blockade. The numbers are already moving. Before the war began, granular urea, the most widely used nitrogen fertilizer in the world, was trading at around $400 to $490 per metric ton. As of late March, that price had jumped to $700 per metric ton, a 40 to 50% increase in under 4 weeks. But here's the part that should make everyone uncomfortable. And this is the mechanism that the financial media is completely missing. The food price impact of a fertilizer shock does not show up immediately. It shows up at harvest time, which is 6 to 12 months away. Here's why. Farmers make fertilizer purchasing decisions during planting season, which across the Northern Hemisphere runs from roughly mid-February through May. Right now, this exact moment, farmers in India, Brazil, Thailand, the United States, and across Europe are trying to source their nitrogen fertilizer for this year's growing season. And they are finding either that it's not available, that it's 40% more expensive, or both. When a farmer cannot afford fertilizer or cannot source it, one of 3 things happens. They plant less. They plant a different crop that requires less nitrogen. Or they apply less fertilizer than their land actually needs, which means lower yields even if the crop grows. Any of those 3 outcomes, less planting, different crops, lower yields, results in the same thing 6 to 12 months from now. Less food, and less food means higher prices. The FAO, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Body, has said explicitly that if this disruption lasts 3 months or longer, the risks escalate significantly and affect global planning decisions not just for 2026, but for years beyond. 3 months. That deadline is somewhere around the end of May. Now, the United States is partially insulated from this. About 3/4 of the fertilizer used on American farms is produced domestically from North American natural gas. But partially insulated is not the same as protected, because even American-made fertilizer is getting more expensive as natural gas prices rise. And because global food markets are interconnected, when wheat yields fall in India or corn yields fall in Brazil, global commodity prices move everywhere. Wolf Research estimates the disruption could raise food-at-home inflation in the United States by roughly 2 percentage points. That's on top of the roughly 0.4 percentage points coming from higher energy costs across the supply chain. Together, that's a meaningful hit to the grocery bill for a country where food inflation was already running at 2.4% year over year before the war even started. And that's in America, which has the most insulation. The countries with the least insulation are bearing something far more serious. Brazil imports nearly half of its fertilizer, and a large portion of that comes through the Strait of Hormuz. India, Bangladesh, Thailand, Indonesia, major agricultural economies across Asia, are heavily dependent on Gulf fertilizer imports during exactly this planning window. A farmer in Thailand, as one analyst put it, faces a cost shock on every single dimension simultaneously. The fertilizer is more expensive. The fuel to run the machinery is more expensive. The cost to ship the harvest is more expensive. And all of it is priced in US dollars that are strengthening because of geopolitical risk. In sub-Saharan Africa, where food already accounts for 36% of average household consumption, compared to 9% in wealthy countries, any spike in staple crop prices is not a financial inconvenience. It is a food security crisis. And there is one more dimension to this that almost nobody is covering. China, another major fertilizer exporter, has responded to the crisis by restricting its own fertilizer exports to protect its domestic market, which means that one of the natural alternative supply sources for countries that normally rely on the Gulf just got smaller. So to summarize where we are, the world's largest source of traded nitrogen fertilizer is currently inaccessible. Spring planting season is happening right now. Urea prices are up 40 to 50%. The backup supplier, China, has restricted exports, and the full price impact on food won't show up in the data for another 6 to 12 months. This is why the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace published a stark warning last week. Even if the Strait of Hormuz reopens tomorrow, restarting fertilizer production and transport takes weeks. Weeks that Northern Hemisphere farmers simply do not have. The most dangerous aspect of a food shock is its delay. Oil prices spike and people feel it immediately. But a fertilizer shortage is invisible for months, right up until the moment it isn't. And by the time higher grocery prices show up in the inflation data, by the time the Fed is looking at it and central banks are trying to respond to it, the damage will have already been done. The crops will have already been planted, or not planted, months earlier. We are potentially at that exact moment right now. The question is whether the strait reopens fast enough to allow supply chains to normalize before the planning window closes. If it does, this is a sharp but ultimately contained disruption. If it doesn't, the food price shock that nobody is talking about right now becomes the story everyone is talking about in September and October. So here's where I want to hear from you. Do you think A, the strait reopens in time and this is a manageable disruption that markets absorb? B, the food price impact is already locked in and we're going to feel it in 6 months regardless? Or C, this is the beginning of something structural, a permanent repricing of global food that outlasts this specific conflict? Drop it in the comments. This one genuinely depends on timing that nobody can predict with certainty right now.